After checking through the program, I noticed that the Daryl Schlam, it seems like he has given a talk on oxide MBE 2 days ago, and so I think probably most of you already are a little bit familiar with what MBE is, but okay, there will be, I believe, some overlaps. Yeah, this is basically the simplest schematic of an MBE system. So you have a thermal efficiency, it's called diffusion cells, basically the thermal evaporator. And then there's this reed gun. This is quite critical. Reflection, high energy electron diffraction system. And then very UHV condition. So you just evaporate usually just elemental sources. And then you evaporate that and then you condense that onto a substrate. And this is just a, so most MBE systems share almost the same very common features like this. So before I go over go into the MBE, I want to briefly go over just thin films. Probably many of these may be already covered, but I'll just go through this very quickly. So basically you need very good vacuum in order to, especially the way MBE works is you want to deliver the source element to some material directly to your substrate without going through much scattering. And so that's the main mechanism how MBE works. So in order to do that, first of all, if you have a lot of gas and you have a lot of scattering, then you cannot deliver the material you deposit from, you evaporate from your source. So your vacuum should be good in the sense of to minimize this scattering effect. The second thing, which is usually, you are more limited by this usually. And the second thing is, if the vacuum is, let's say if the vacuum is 10 to the minus 6 torr, then your substrate is coated by air. And roughly 1 second, it takes 1 second to coat your substrate by air. If air has 100% sticking coefficient, usually, okay, air does not have 100% sticking coefficient, so they don't grow, but at least you can see that the surface will be just oxidized if it is reactive in a matter of just a second. So if you want to really, if your surface is quite reactive surface like silicon or something like that, then your vacuum definitely should be much more orders of magnitude better than this. So at least 10 to the minus 9 torr, it takes 30 minutes. So it should be better than this, roughly speaking. So that's usually the condition MBE operates. So this applies to just almost any film growth. So in order to grow thin films, whether it's MBE or other method, you have to just emit the source materials, and they should be transported to the substrate, and then the material should be condensed on the substrate. So roughly the model, the growth model, can be described by this kind of process, right? The material is coming in, a surface diffusion occurs, and then some absorption should occur first, and then sometimes it gets dissolved if the temperature is too high, or sometimes it can also diffuse into the bulk. So that's what's happening. So this whole thing is happening in some dynamic way. So you have to sort of understand this, what's happening on the surface to grow, to control your growth. And also another sort of important thing to understand thin film growth is basically once the element just starts to move, and then eventually it moves very fast compared with inside the bulk, because the element has bonding only, let's say at the bottom, for example. Inside the bulk, it is bonded to all 3 dimensions. The bonding occurs, so the diffusion is very, very difficult. But on the surface, because you have only, let's say if you're here, then you have bonding only on one side. So they can move very easily. So that's why the surface diffusion is quite fast compared to the bulk. So that's why the films you can grow usually relatively low temperatures for films because of this fast surface diffusion. And also, but if you sort of understand that, then you can realize that usually the film grows if the surface diffusion is fast enough, high enough, then usually the nucleation, the growth occurs usually at the step edges or these corners, because if you go to the corner, then you have now bonding. The number of bonds grows, so they cannot move around easily, so they get stuck. So that's why if you have high enough surface diffusion, then the growth usually occurs through this through the step edges instead of in the middle of nowhere. And so, but if that all depends on manufacturers, chemical reactivity, and also temperatures and various things. But also another thing is depending on the interaction between your material and the substrate, and then whether the bonding is stronger between your own the elements or the materials compared with between the material and the substrate. All these depending on this all these details. Sometimes film can grow in some 3D mode, island growth, or sometimes the usually what we normally want is we want some smooth, very smooth, just two-dimensional film, and that's what we normally want. But that does not always happen, because even if that's what you want, because of some fundamental factor between the substrate and the film, sometimes film grows in 3D mode, or sometimes it can grow 2D mode, or sometimes it can grow in intermediate range. So, but this whole thing is affected by the multiple factors, temperature and also reactivity with the substrate, and so by understanding these multiple factors, you can control all these three, and then you can achieve the morphology you want. And also another important thing is the film growth is okay. Usually when you grow bulk crystals, you usually rely on the thermodynamics and phase diagram in most cases. So, but in case of films, this thermodynamic requirement is, yes, you are also governed by this thermodynamics, but the another very important thing is this kinetics. Very important because of this diffusion, right? The surface diffusion is so important that you can. So because in thin films, the C-axis diffusion is much slower than AB axis in the plane diffusion. So because of that, the growth occurs very differently from just the thermodynamic growth method like bulk crystal growth. And that you can see, that's why by manipulating this difference between kinetics and thermodynamics, you can create this very beautiful artificial superlattice because you can, in full thermodynamic equilibrium condition, you can never form superlattice structure unless that's thermodynamically somehow possible. But usually many of the superlattices you make are not thermodynamically the most stable structure. But still you can make it because you rely on this the very slow diffusion along the C direction. So understanding the difference between kinetics and thermodynamics is important. And so and also the films can be roughly categorized into three different types. So depending on the crystal nature. So if there's no crystal, there's no long-range order, then it's amorphous. The silicon, the glass is a good example. It's just completely random. There's no periodic nature. That's amorphous structure. And the other extreme is, it's well-ordered. That's epitaxial film. Usually, in many cases, epitaxial film is what we want. But even if that's what you want, in many cases, you can grow something in between, which is polycrystalline. So in MBE, you usually look for epitaxial films, and but in many other cases, sometimes amorphous films are sometimes better sometimes because there's no crystalline defects. But anyhow, we will usually try to make epitaxial film in many of the interesting materials we are going to study. So okay, this is the schematic of MBE. So as I said, probably the most important analytic tool that is used for MBE is this read. Read is the number one, the most important thing. And also that's what makes MBE so special. These days, probably as Jack, as you probably heard from yesterday from Jack Cullen's talk, I believe, this read is so powerful that it is being used by other even growth methods. But read was originally used in MBE. The reason read is so special is you basically look at what you are growing in real time. This is very very convenient because before you use this kind of real time growth monitoring tool, the way you make material is you basically make it without knowing what you are growing. Yes, you mix things, do the right ratio, and you mix things, and then only after you grow, you do, let's say, X-ray diffraction, and then or other characterizations, and then you can tell whether you have grown the right form or not. But the read, you basically, while you are growing, you probably know 90% of the information you can get. So usually you don't have to do any ex situ characterization. 90% you can tell right away what you are growing. Whether something goes wrong, then you can correct it. And so because of that, the feedback is very fast. So basically what we did is you have something like orders of 10 kilovolt electron volt, the electron beam shining at a glancing angle, and you look at the diffraction pattern. Diffraction pattern usually appears as a streak. So if it is a single crystalline. And but the details of the shapes is because this is a K-space version of, you are looking at the K-space. So if you have good experience, then you can sort of draw the picture in your mind what the real space morphology will be like. So by doing that, you can quickly determine and then correct the growth. And then you can tell whether the film grows the way you thought. And this is some, so let's say, for example, depending on the real space structures, so if it is a smooth, okay, it is not so sharp here, but if it is really smooth, then you have the streaky pattern. And if you have some 3D, these are some 3D, some bumps. If you have some 3D islands, then you have some spotty patterns, and then and then if it is like this, and you have some particular pattern. So all these different read patterns can be sort of associated with corresponding the real space morphology. So just as another example how the read can be used, this is some film I grew a long time ago. But for example, this is a single crystalline film. Okay, this is not the best read pattern, but you can see the streaks. So single crystalline, streak. And if it becomes amorphous, there's no pattern. This is aluminum oxide, amorphous aluminum oxide. And then if aluminum oxide becomes single crystalline again, then the streaky read pattern appears. And if you grow polycrystalline films, you have rings. So all these different shapes can be interpreted quite straightforwardly how it looks in the real space. One of the also useful, one of the very frequent applications of read is this by using this read oscillation. What read oscillation means is if you monitor the intensity of the beam, that there's oscillation. Usually the oscillation is correlated with the atomic scale smoothness. So if you have just one atomic unit cell, let's say for example gallium arsenide, which probably yes Lauren will talk about afterwards, but almost any materials, this molecular layer, the minimum, the building block period matches the period of this oscillation because of how it grows. So certain cases the read oscillation does not, if the film quality is too bad, then if it's just completely rough, then you don't see read oscillations. Also in the other extreme, if the film quality is too good, then it's called the step flow mode. In that case, your surface remains all the same because your everything propagates from the step edge, then the surface morphology does not change at all. In that case, there is no read oscillation. But that's the extremes. But in many cases, if the film is reasonably good, then this read oscillation can be commonly observed.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
So the oscillation is in the amplitude, I guess, right? So
yes.
Is that the amplitude of the streaks, let's say, or do you?
Yeah, streak, anything, almost anything.
You see the pattern change. So how do you get this amplitude? Is it just
intensity? Just this one spot, any spot.
One spot.
Yeah, spot. Yeah, everything oscillates the same, eh?
But the pattern stays the same. It's just the.
No, pattern can be so okay. So this is just a very simplest application. So looking at the read oscillation is just probably the simplest. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, things can change. Yes, if the pattern changes, then
just look at one of the spots and then watch the oscillation.
Yes. So yes, that's you can apply this read oscillation to high order by looking at multiple things. So that's the simplest, very naive application. Just by looking at this intensity one spot. But you can go step further, for example, let's say, okay, this is just oxide example, but for example, the whole pattern changes. Yeah, there's some bismuth oxide, strontium oxide. This is just some oxide, some old superconducting oxide layer superconducting oxide film. But yeah, this is not just, you can, in this case, by simply looking at the reed oscillation doesn't mean anything, because the whole thing, the whole feature changes. So in that case, yes, you can, let's say, imagine you can sort of keep track of each individual spot separately in parallel. Then you can get some information, more quantitative information, or just qualitatively by looking at this, you can see the whole feature changes. By looking at the, so you can approach it more quantitatively or qualitatively, depending on what you want. So basically, the reed is very important and very powerful. So by sort of learning and by mastering how to interpret reed, you can save 90, maybe 99% of time. This whole thing, by looking at the reed, you can just set up your growth recipe without doing any other characterization. But by just looking at the reed, basically you can, let's say, if you use reed, maybe you can sort of, develop the recipe, let's say, within 2 days versus maybe even 2 months.
So at least you have the number one read. Why is it that you have this feature?
All those yes. All those are details. The details of the whole structure. So it's, yeah. So exactly, because the shapes can be, by the way, this particular case, it is, if you look at it at different angles, then you have so-called some kind of so-called supermodulations. So, okay, there is a, this is some very, very fine detail, but the smaller spacing in reed's pattern means larger real space periodicity. So there is a big spacing that usually represents the atomic, the spacing or lattice constant. If you have any smaller features, that's usually, you have something repeated every, let's say, 10 lattice constants. Then that appears as a smaller some feature here.
Is that like a step edge or something?
No, it's not just, in this particular, if you look at it at a different angle, then you have actually these lines appear so actually over here. So these are, okay. So yeah, exactly what it is, sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes it's not straightforward.
Would that be something, let's say, in the depth of the film, or?
No, it's on the surface. Everything is on the surface. Because this covers only not more than 1 nanometer. Everything happening just 1 nanometer level. So it's really very, very surface, just the top, is dominated by the top unit cell. Yeah, that's why you look at this is actually just single atomic layer. From here, it's only a matter of some couple of angstrom, 3 angstrom or so. From here to here is only 1 to 2 nanometer, from here to here. It is 1 to 2 nanometer. But there's a huge difference. So that's why the reed is, yeah. So, using reed, how to use reed is actually, that helps a lot. So the MBE started with semiconductor system, especially something like gallium arsenide. Lauren is the word expert, gallium arsenide. So that's where the MBE has developed in 70s and 80s. So these are the materials that are very popular, where the MBE was used a lot. And then, okay, after this high TC superconductor was developed, the oxide MBE somehow has developed. So someone like Dale Schlam is one of the experts. And so then as you know, there are many the interesting oxide systems. But the oxide MBE is quite tricky, quite difficult, is actually, because okay, I'll go over that later. But I'll go over that later. And then also more recently, this chalcogenide system has become very popular recently, especially because of after the emergence of topological insulators. Because topological insulators, and are basically chalcogenides. Also, it so happened that many of these 2D materials, also many of them are also chalcogenides. So, for example, tungsten diselenide, tungsten ditelluride, molybdenum diselenide, molybdenum diselenide. So, and also in terms of topological insulators, bismuth selenide, bismuth telluride. So many of them happens to be chalcogenides, and so I will focus on to the chalcogenides in this talk. So among the chalcogenides, the system I have been heavily working on has been this topological insulators, which is mostly the most famous system among them is bismuth selenide or bismuth telluride, or sometimes this can be antimony bismuth selenide or telluride. So that topological insulator system is a layered structure with weak van der Waals bonding between these so-called quintuple layers. Okay, the reason it's called quintuple layer is because this is selenium, bismuth, selenium. That's the minimum building block. Bismuth 2, selenium 3. And then after that, selenium appears again. The bonding strength between selenium is very weak. That's the weakest. That's called van der Waals bonding. So when you try to grow it, you cannot control sub-unit cell level, because this whole thing tries to grow as a unit. So reed oscillation appears in this unit instead of subunit. So you can never achieve subunit oscillation. The entire thing grows as one unit. So that's called quintuple layer. Roughly this unit cell has about 1 nanometer. So this is the official lattice constant is 9 angstrom, but in terms of the building block, minimum building block, this is just about 9.5 angstrom, 1/3 of this. So roughly 1 nanometer. 1 nanometer is roughly 1 quintuple layer. So I will just very briefly go over what topological insulator is. Basically, topological insulator is insulating in the bulk and metallic on the outside. Okay, in the simplest view. Okay, there are many more things, but okay, let's make it very simple. Okay, so and then why MBE is so MBE actually turns out to be probably the best tool for these topological insulators actually. Also best tool for something like gallium arsenide as well. So there's reason why, okay. So for certain materials, okay, MBE is probably not the best for actually many complex oxides. There's reason. Because MBE is best if you can grow materials under so-called self-limited growth mode, then MBE is the best. That's what this means is, let's say if we want to grow bismuth selenide, then only what matters is the question is how can we achieve this stoichiometry? How do you achieve this stoichiometry? 2 to 3. When you are making bulk crystals, you weigh bismuth 2, you weigh selenium, whatever the weight, and then you mix them and then heat them up, and then you make 2 to 3 compound. Okay, when you have to sort of mix them in a close the mass ratio. But in MBE environment, you don't have to do that. What you do is you just let's evaporate bismuth, and then you evaporate selenium, let's say 10 times or even more. Then what happens is selenium works like a gas. So it forms automatically 2 to 3, and any extra selenium just disappears. It just bounces off. It desorbs. So automatically it forms this 2 to 3 ratio. And so if that is possible, then this is perfect for MBE growth. That's exactly the same in gallium arsenide. Gallium, arsenic, you have 10 times or more arsenic. And then it's limited by only gallium flux. In this bismuth case, you are limited by only bismuth. So you don't have to worry about stoichiometry. It's automatic. So that's perfect. So if a material has the self-limited growth mode, then MBE is very easy and perfect. It makes perfect materials. And that's why for topological insulators, MBE has been very successful. Also, another thing to note is usually when you grow thin films, the growth temperature is much lower than, roughly it is about 3/8 of this melting temperature. On the other hand, if you want to make bulk crystals, you have to grow at above the melting temperatures, because you have to mix it. So that's another big difference. So MBE growth occurs at much lower temperature than the melting point.
The self-limited growth is only available if there is only one safe base, right?
That's true. That's true. That's true. That's another yes. So in this extreme, Well, if this is the most stable form, yes, then it can be formed. But if you want to form, let's say 3, 4, then yes, it will be very tricky. Yes, it is a very good point. Very good point.
There are other bismuth selenium phases.
Yes, there are. So, but in this real selenium-rich condition, you form only this. Yeah. So,
Selenium-rich is
yes. So, but sometimes in certain cases, people want to. Okay, a good example is, let's say, as an example, let's say if you want to grow iron 2 oxygen 3 versus iron 3 oxygen 4. That's very tricky, because in some sense, iron 2 oxygen 3 may be a little bit easier, because iron 2 oxygen 3 can be grown at the most oxygen-rich condition, iron 2 oxygen 3. But if you want to grow iron 3 oxygen 4, you have to somehow go to that small window. It's very tricky. So in that case, yes, that's tricky. But if you are on this on the line compound on the very, very far right or far left, then MBE is very easy. Yeah, and perfect. And so this is, okay, that was the schematic I showed you earlier, but this is what we have at Rutgers. So this is the chalcogenide MBE, what we use to grow all these clay insulators. By the way, we had, until last year, we had only this about here, but we added this whole thing over the past year. And that's the oxide MBE, and there's also sputtering system over here. Yeah, I think this is quite very, very unique system. But I'll focus on to chalcogenide side here. So what is the detail? Yes. Okay. So this is a chalcogenide MBE system. So okay, this is the read screen. So on the other hand, there's the electron gun. I'm not showing the electron gun, but it is covered by this black box in order to block the light. But if you open it, okay, this is when there's no light. This is just phosphorus screen. There's a camera. And then if you turn on the electron beam, okay, you can barely see there's the streaks. There are streaks. So this is how it is. But normally we don't operate like this. We operate with the cover. It's completely covered. That's how we operate. But this is just to show how it looks for green phosphorus. And also these are the efficient cells. So for example, this efficient cell has, let's say, bismuth or selenium or antimony or tellurium, each individual element. So this is just an example of problem. Maybe this is selenium cell. Selenium, you put in your selenium materials. Okay, we don't care. Yeah, okay. Someone like Lauren, yes, is very careful in dealing with arsenic and those. We don't care much, because these materials we are not at the limit of really ultra purity. We are not limited by that yet. So a little bit of air contamination is not very bad. So it is not as critical, at least at this stage. So we are a little bit more tolerable about the cleanliness a little bit. So this is, okay, this is selenium. And then basically this is thermal cell. You maintain a particular temperature, and then the selenium evaporates at the vapor pressure determined by that particular temperature. And this is just selenium material. This is a crucible. Yeah, crucible is sometimes it is a aluminous crucible or PBN. Poly, it is a boron nitride, some crucible. And you put it in, and that's it.
So is it just put shot in there?
Yeah, these are, you see the tiny, tiny little shots. Yeah, put them in. That's it. So basically, the way it operates is very simple. You just heat it up to, it's like boiling. Just heating water, just to a particular temperature. That's it. And then there's some vapor pressure coming out. So vapor pressure is completely controlled by almost completely controlled by the temperature. Also, another thing what we use is, because we want to measure the flux. Yeah, we have to know how much we evaporate. But in case of let's say in some other MBEs like gallium arsenide MBEs, people use something called beam flux monitor, but we don't use that. Okay. In our case, we use quartz crystal, something called quartz crystal microbalance. Basically, the way it measures is it is a quartz crystal. We put it in. Yeah, we can put it in and out, and put it into the growth position, and then you evaporate it, and then you can the crystal, the frequency, oscillation frequency changes, and then you can convert that to how much material you deposit. So you evaporate, and then that way you can measure the flux. Yeah, That's what we use to measure the flux. So that way, you put it in and then you evaporate bismuth, for example, and measure the flux. Evaporate selenium, you measure the flux. So it's quite within, I would say, within maybe plus minus 20% in the worst case, probably. You can get the reasonably accurate flux value. And also, this is substrate we use. So that's we use sometimes the 10 millimeter by 10 millimeter substrate. That's just substrate holder. Yeah, just using a clip. Or we can also use just 3-inch wafer. This is a silicon wafer. You can put the whole thing onto that, or actually, by the way, this is ring, but this should be mounted on top of this. Or you can use the small substrate or large wafer. Okay, so what kind of things do we have to consider? Do we have to think about when we do the MBE growth? So yeah, substrate is very important because there are many things we have to, even for the substrate, what substrate to choose? Yeah, substrate, how does it match with the material you grow chemically, or lattice matching, or how expensive the substrate is? All those things we have to consider, and also growth temperatures and source temperatures, and the source temperature determines the vapor pressure and flux. And also, does the source, how well does the source stick to your substrate? And also, does the source react well? Let's say if you want to make bismuth selenide, do they really react well enough to form your phase, bismuth selenide? And also, yeah, how does the source react with the substrate? And how does the source also, is it okay to, is your crucible compatible with your source? And also, yes, how to achieve stoichiometry, and then all these things. We have to consider all these things. And then, many things, there are some standard solutions, but if you go start a new material, let's say if I go back to 2009, that's when I first started making bismuth selenide. Okay, nobody has grown bismuth selenide yet. I have to decide. There's no previous bismuth selenide MBE growth. So I am starting for the first time. There probably are other groups, but there's no published results. So I'm the first, one of the first. And then we have to decide what to grow. What substrate? Okay, what substrate to choose? Okay, you look into, first this is a hexagonal structure. So you first look for the same symmetry. It's a hexagonal sort of symmetry. So all these have this hexagonal symmetry. Aluminum sapphire 001 or silicon 111, indium phosphide 111. Okay, so by the way, these are the commercial level substrate. At that time, I didn't consider this. I added, okay, this is something I add just for comparison. But this substrate does not exist. At least, let's see if you compare these three. So in terms of lattice matching, this seems to be the best, indium phosphide. Okay, but indium phosphide, the price is quite expensive. Also, unless there's strong reason, silicon is always the best. Okay, if you can use silicon, let's start with silicon. Unless there's strong reason why not to use silicon. So silicon has some issues, but price is lowest. That's the most popular one. So okay, let's start with silicon first. That's how I started. Silicon first. Sure, there could be, whether it's the best, probably that's not the best. That's just the first. We decided to grow on silicon first. And let's see how it goes. Okay, and then, okay, you do not know because nobody has grown it. So let's see how it grows. Based on the experience, my previous experience, okay. You grow it, you choose particular substrate temperature. Let's grow it at 110. Let's see how it goes. Oh, it doesn't look good. Because good means the very shiny reed pattern is good. Oh, okay, this is not good. Probably the temperature is too low. Let's raise the temperature. Oh, shoot, okay, there are some rings. Oh, that's not good. Hey, let's raise it further. Maybe that's because the temperature is too low. Let's raise it further. Oh, sure, still not good. Okay, so it seems like it's reacting, something's happening. Okay, well, I could never get good growth. Okay, so single temperature growth doesn't work. That's it. Okay, now you have to play with the temperature. Because this is another trick I used previously successfully multiple times. So it seemed like it seemed like what was happening was based on, you can also get rid of this once you form it. That means it reacted. So usually if it is simply a 3D cluster, if you heat it up, you can evaporate it away. You can start over. But for this, it reacted, so you cannot get rid of it completely. It's all reacted. So with silicon, you can also, it's hard, it's not, that makes sense because silicon is so reactive. So it's quite easy to easy to guess that silicon reacts with selenium and bismuth selenide, so you react it. So we have to minimize, we have to get rid of the reaction. So how do we do that? Okay, you can suppress the reaction usually if you go to very low temperature. Very low temperature reaction does not occur. As you go to higher temperature, reaction occurs. So let's do that. Let's first grow very minimal layer at very low temperature. Low temperature, let's say 110. This is low temperature, so probably there's no reaction. So you grow just a couple of layers, and then you heat it up to some a little higher temperature. Oh, weave pattern becomes good. You continue. Oh, boom. Okay, works well. So using this two-step growth, the problem was solved. Yes. Okay. So, and also from the reed pattern, this spacing, from that you can actually estimate the lattice constant. Lattice constant, relatively, you can get the relative lattice constant. So you can see that just after that first quintuple, first unit cell, the lattice constant has changed right away. From this is a lattice constant of silicon, on that direction, and this is a lattice constant of bismuth selenide. So one unit cell, it gets relaxed right away. So by looking at the reed, you can see, okay, it gets relaxed. This is normally not the case. When you grow films, most of the times the films are bound to the substrate. That's more common, but the reason they get relaxed right away, the lattice constant is vastly different after one unit cell, is because it's all van der Waals bonded material. So the bonding is so weak, it gets relaxed right away after one unit cell. So by tracking, let's say this reed spacing, you can see that it becomes big, small, big, small, big, small. So this is a bismuth selenide superlattice. This is time. This is inverse lattice constant. So you can see that the lattice constant, yes, you can sort of keep track of the lattice constant in real time. Also, for example, when you grow bismuth selenide, bismuth indium selenide on top of bismuth selenide, or the other way, there are also lattice constant, the lattice spacing changes. So like this. So you can, by keeping track of this reed spacing, you can also estimate the lattice constant. Okay, so you can apply this two-step growth on various substrates, and various substrate. And even what's interesting is this is amorphous silicon oxide. There's no registry. It's completely just amorphous. But even on amorphous silicon oxide, you can grow reasonably good single crystalline-like film. This is possible because it is the van der Waals bonded. If it's not van der Waals bonded, this is impossible. You cannot have this. You can have at best just polycrystalline, just rings. Yeah, rings. Polycrystalline, random some structure at best. You never have this nice streaky, reasonably nice streaky pattern. So this implies bismuth selenide can be grown on almost anything. But sure, it can be grown. But the thing is, depending on the substrate, the quality changes a lot. Yeah, okay. Just by looking at the morphology, on sapphire versus silicon oxide, yeah, sapphire looks the best. On sapphire, it's the best. Or on silicon oxide or silicon, this is all one unit cell step. And this is all atomical flat. This is all atomical flat. Yeah, this is flat, but you can see that the terrace is much bigger on this. So this is the best. The quality depends a lot on the substrate. After you grow the film, how do you know the stoichiometry? You do RBS. There can be other ways, but RBS is the most accurate way to measure the stoichiometry. So for example, okay, this is not bismuth selenide, but this is just done on niobium selenide, for example. For example, let's say, well, I wanted to grow niobium diselenide, niobium selenium 2. That's what I wanted. I grew it. Do RBS? Oh no, it is not 2. So in this particular case, niobium selenide is quite tricky to grow. So I couldn't achieve niobium selenide 2. But let's say if we did this on bismuth selenide, it is always 2 to 3. Bismuth selenide. I always form bismuth selenide 2 to 3 without any problem. So this peak, by integrating this intensity, you can estimate the stoichiometry. So you do RBS to see. Okay. And then you do X-ray, but we don't do X-ray. So okay, the thing is, we don't do this extra, this is AFM. We normally don't do this on a regular basis. We do this only once in a while when we think we really have to. Most of the times we don't do it. We look at by read. That's it. But once in a while, we do RBS, we do X-ray, once in a while, yeah, mostly for publishing purpose. People just complain, hey, why don't you do XRD? Why don't you do AFM? Okay, let's make them happy. But we know most of the things, so it's yeah. So read is, yeah, people usually don't understand how powerful read is, so they think read is not enough. But in fact, actually read is, yeah, 90% enough. And also, yeah, TM also, if you grow TM and you can check the interface, okay, so there's some disordered interface. You can get some extra information using other characterizations, definitely. But we don't do that often. So through this, we have basically, we have many generations. 1, 2, so these are all nominally we grow, let's say, bismuth selenide films, but every generation is improved. And then the important thing is, when we make the, important thing is, the commercial substrates are never, commercial substrate, you don't have to be limited by the commercial substrate, but commercial substrates are, you cannot use non-commercial substrates because they are not available. But, so, these commercial substrates all have some issues. Even if the morphology was good on sapphire, you can see that in terms of morphology, it is best on sapphire, even if it has a very bad lattice mismatch. But the surface defect density, interface defect density are all high. They're all very high. So, what is the solution? What is the solution? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, so you can see this. There are many issues, many issues. It seems like this is chemically in every sense, this is probably the best. But the problem is this substrate does not exist. Yeah, the substrate doesn't exist. Nobody sells. Nobody can make single crystalline substrate indium selenide. So we just make it on our own, using some as a buffer layer. So this kind of buffer layer scheme is also commonly used in MBE technique. So you go through rather complex steps. Yeah, this is rather complex step. Yeah, the way we developed this recipe was quite interesting because indium selenide grown on sapphire is bad. We want indium selenide substrate. We are trying to use alumina as a substrate, but indium selenide on alumina oxide is bad. But indium selenide on bismuth selenide is good. But we do not want to grow indium selenide on bismuth selenide because we want to grow bismuth selenide on top of indium selenide. So chicken and egg problem. But the way we solve this problem is you grow, because bismuth selenide, the first layer is bad, but the rest of the layer is very good. First layer is bad. We do not want this, but it turns out that by growing indium selenide on top of this bad bismuth selenide, and then you just heat it up, then bismuth selenide just disappears. So you form nice indium selenide, and then that's it. Then happy. And that's how we make this buffer layer. And then this buffer layer was very important because that led to a bunch of things which was not possible before. So it led to quantum Hall effect. It led to some, also previously even doping tunability. We couldn't make p-type. Nobody was able to make p-type bismuth selenide thin films. And then we were able to do that on this buffer layer. And also, many things followed. All these beautiful quantum effects followed because of this perfect, best substrate buffer layer. That's it. These are my group members, and Jisoo and Gorab. Gorab is relatively new to our group, and they are here. Jisoo is here, and Gorab is right there. You can ask them also. Yeah. Thank you.